First off, apologies about the title for this video. Whilst I'm alright at service management, coming up with puns for service management related videos, clearly not my forte. Anyway, let's power on past that and get into today's video. For those of you that are new here, hello, I'm Gareth at Switch It Off and On Again, a no frills but practical channel dedicated to getting the most out of IT service management. And as you may have guessed from that shitty title, today I want to talk to you about knowledge management. Now, knowledge management for me is one of those topics that we all know we should be doing, right? A little bit like we know we should eat our 5 a day, don't drink more than 2 units a month, getting God knows how many steps an hour. But like those things, knowledge management, well, we don't do it very well. Or like many companies out there, we take a half-assed stab at doing it. And when we look at our knowledge base, is it actually any good? Is it making a difference to how we operate? Or more importantly, providing value to our service consumers? Probably not. So why is that? Well, I've got a theory. And that is, well, it's the work, isn't it? It's like the filling in of timesheets, the clearing out of your inbox or downloaded files. It's the stuff we'll get round to when it's quieting down a bit, knowing full well we probably never bother. And apologies to all the knowledge managers out there, it's not really why people get into technology, IT or service management in the first place. I imagine if you're working in IT, you like solving problems, working with technology or processes, or being out there talking to customers and consumers. Maybe not so much the last one. I doubt many of our technically orientated colleagues have ever been at a technology conference, workshop and thought, well, this is great and all, but what I can't wait to do is get back and document all of this. But that aside, knowledge management is important. Done right, it can have a massive benefit, not only to users and their experience of consuming technology services, but how we as technology providers have to manage those services. And we use knowledge all the time, right? Has there been a day go by in the last 15 years or so where you've not had to Google or use tools like ChatGPT to find out some information? All of that is pulling on managed knowledge information to allow us to achieve a certain outcome. Imagine how difficult our lives would be with no relevant, up-to-date, accurate reference material. Nightmare. I guess as with a lot of things where service management practices aren't having the desired effect, it's not the point or the objective of the practice, but how it's been implemented. So let's take a look at some simple things you can do to get the most from your knowledge management efforts. So firstly, we should ask ourselves, why are we doing knowledge management? And actually, this isn't exclusive just to knowledge management. We'll start with asking ourselves, why are we deciding to expend time, effort into knowledge management? What's the outcome that we're hoping to achieve? And what are some guiding principles that we want our teams to align to? All of that needs determining up front and should form part of your knowledge management strategy or plan. If you don't have a clear idea on why you're doing it, other than you think you should be, how can you measure against that? How do you know that you've succeeded? How do you know what good looks like? Now, whenever people hear words like strategy or plan, our minds, well, at least mine does anyway, goes to long, drawn out, heavyweight artifacts. Well, let's chuck that notion straight in the bin. Your strategy, plan, principles for knowledge management, in fact, any process, should be clear, concise statements of intent with clear, measurable objectives. Statements that are easy for people to refer to, get behind, stay on top of. If you haven't seen the back catalogue of my videos, go and check out the one I did a couple of years back on service principles as a starter. More specifically for knowledge management, consider the following. What knowledge are we talking about? How are we going to store it? Who's going to manage it? How are we going to acquire it? What are the important elements required to achieve those objectives? Having this clear view about what knowledge you're talking about and how it will be used has to be your starting point. And as I find myself saying frequently, start where you are, start small and iterate. You're not going to win any prizes. In fact, you won't achieve anything if you try too big too soon. Have a look at a specific area with a specific problem that could be fixed with better knowledge management and tackle that. Make some improvements, fail fast, and measure your results and move forward from there. Once you've got a tried and tested mechanism that delivers results, start looking at where this can then be further applied. I've seen some attempts in the past at trying to fix knowledge management in one foul swoop. I was working with one company and their head of service decided one day that from now on, all knowledge needed to be stored in the company's ServiceNow platform. That was the new approach to knowledge management. Store everything in there, use the out-of-the-box workflow. Little else in terms of direction, what we're aiming to achieve, other than we'll be consistent in how we're now managing knowledge. Naturally, that fell apart quite quickly. So be specific, be measurable, and start small. There you go. Half of your knowledge management strategy has been written for you. You just need to fill in the gaps. Where I've seen knowledge management plans fail is where the approach centres largely around those working in technical teams being expected to take time out of their day to write shit down. Whilst there certainly can be a place for that, the key to good knowledge management, I believe, is to try and make the creation, the use and the measurement of any knowledge articles neatly integrated into other service management processes. What do I mean? Well, let me give you a real life example of where I've made this a reality. So let's talk about incident management for a moment. Now, most, if not all ITSM platforms will, at the end of the incident management process, ask the resolver to detail what they did to fix the incident. And I guess like me, you've seen the quality of updates into those fields resemble something along the lines of fixed, issue resolved, closing ticket. Simply a word or two to get round the fact that more often than not, these fields are mandatory. In reality, what should go into that field is a prime candidate for knowledge material. What was done to fix the incident that should benefit others in the future as reference material on how they too can fix a similarly reported incident. However, how often does anybody go back over old incident records associated to the various services you provide to do anything with that information? Maybe a problem manager if they're looking for trends, but apart from that, not so much. So here's what to do. When resolving incident tickets, have your ITSM platform ask the resolver from the existing knowledge base which article was used to resolve the incident. And in most cases, your ITSM platform will allow you to associate or attach the knowledge to the incident record. If there's no relevant KA, again, it's possible to have the resolution notes content automatically proposed as a candidate knowledge article that can then go to the associated service owner for the service associated to the incident for approval. It's at this stage that the service owner can validate that the proposed knowledge article is a worthy addition to the knowledge base, or it can be returned to the resolver where, for example, they tried to gain the resolution field to provide more meaningful, useful information. Now, if your knowledge base is in a bit of a state, it's going to take a chunk of effort where this approach will start to pay off. However, there are definite benefits from doing so. Firstly, you'll start to organically grow your knowledge base with content that can be used to resolve real life scenarios and are having an impact on your service. Secondly, as the knowledge base starts to get populated, most of the common ITSM platforms will propose certain knowledge articles based on metadata being entered into the incident record. So those resolution details to an incident can instantly be shared with colleagues who are dealing with the same or similar incidents. Theoretically, speeding up the time to resolution, utilising the knowledge already captured to provide a better response. And instantly we've tripped across the real reason why knowledge management is a beneficial thing. Taking the information that we've gathered and reusing it to improve in the least onerous way possible. There's a couple of other things to make sure you do when adopting this approach, and it's largely around measurement. One of the traps we can fall into is creating all of this knowledge only for it to sit there gathering dust. Don't let that happen to your knowledge content. If you're asking your colleagues to confirm which knowledge articles were used to resolve certain incidents, use that data point to identify which articles are being used often. They might be a valuable input into your problem management process. But also look at which articles aren't or haven't been used. That might indicate that the knowledge is no longer valid or useful and therefore might be a candidate for retirement. I think it's useful as part of your incident management metrics to include a percentage of incidents resolved using knowledge material. This will provide a good indication of where your incident and knowledge management processes are working harmoniously together to provide a positive outcome, or not, which will lead you to work with specific teams about specific services where more can be done to improve practically and pragmatically. Now, as I mentioned earlier, as part of your knowledge management plan, give consideration to the types of knowledge you want to use and manage and how these will be stored. Now, there's often a challenge, a bit of a battle about where. Where should knowledge reside? To provide a holistic, all-encompassing view, allowing all knowledge to be managed consistently, the obvious answer to that is the ITSM platform, where both service consumers, via a customer view of the knowledge base, via the self-service portal, and those in IT involved in the support of services can have everything at their fingertips, where a common approval, review, workflow can be applied to aid the management of all this content. However, like it or not, there are some roles in IT where the majority of the work involved is outside of the ITSM. Sacrilege. If, for example, you have developer type roles in the organisation, it's likely they'll be using tools like GitHub or ADO, where the SDLC process knowledge content will be built up and stored in those tools. Asking your developer teams to rekey all of this information is not likely to be a favourable option. Why? Well, in those scenarios, a lot of that content may only be appropriate for those individuals in those teams. Therefore, does it justify the effort to constantly transpose that content from its natural home to the ITSM? Largely not. This comes back to those knowledge management principles we touched on earlier. Your knowledge management plan or strategy should provide the necessary guide rails for teams to know what content needs to be stored in the right location and the process for managing it. For example, you might choose to adopt a principle along the lines of knowledge material that can benefit more than one team in the support of a service will reside within the ITSM, or knowledge content that can only be used by a specific service team will be stored in a location of the service owner's choosing. You may also decide to define what your IT department deems as critical knowledge and where critical knowledge should be stored. For example, you might determine disaster recovery plans, release notes, incident resolution details, given their broad appeal, must be stored in the central ITSM. Any other information, knowledge articles falling outside of these principles or guide rails, we can trust to the various authors, owners to manage as they see fit. But how do we know that those teams will manage their content in line with how we manage the content in the ITSM platform? Well, there's a few angles from which to answer that. One, we have to remind ourselves why we bother doing knowledge management: to leverage latent information to make it accessible to those that it might benefit, to provide a cheaper, faster, better outcome. The guide rails you should set should always keep this point in mind, over and above simply sheep dipping and constraining teams to work in a restrictive way. Two, there's no harm, if time and effort allows, for your knowledge manager to periodically audit these decentralised knowledge repositories to see if they are being well maintained and used, and support the owners of these identify where improvements can be made. And thirdly, well, we're all adults. Where service owners are, in line with your principles, opting to store specialised knowledge in a local knowledge store, it's only hurting them and their teams if they don't manage this properly. Final point around this, and the recreation of knowledge from where it lives to another source, I think should always be a no-no. Through signposting or toolset integrations, it's possible to direct users with a single entry point to wherever the knowledge is stored. But there is little value in taking knowledge stored in one location and simply recreating it in your centralised knowledge base. Why? Well, it's 100% duplicated effort. Every time the source material is updated, you've got to A, figure out that it has changed, then B, repeat the update into the duplicate every single time. I know this sounds like madness and completely obvious, yet people do it. I think I've mentioned in a previous video, I worked with a company whose service desk routinely took information from the Microsoft Office support site, the Apple support site, and recreated this in their knowledge base so it could be shared on the portal to their users. I asked their service desk lead why they go to so much effort in doing so, rather than just providing a signposted link, and their response was that their users found the information easier to use if it was in the company's house style that we were used to. Bollocks. When we get stuck at home with technology, well, not just technology, lots of things. Nowadays, our go-to behaviour is to go to Google and find a site where the information is. I'm probably about to piss off a bunch of UX designers. Do we really give a monkeys about the font or the layout? Yeah, okay, this is important too, but we rarely, if ever, discard useful information from the internet because of how the author has chosen to present it. So why do we think our service consumers are suddenly going to start doing that when they enter the workplace? If you're happy to signpost to where original content is provided, that's great. But that totally doesn't relieve the service owners from ensuring the content is still valid, still available, not been replaced by a picture of a cat. Still, that's a lot less overhead than having to painstakingly recreate and maintain stuff that's already available. And finally, like all things service management, we need a process in play to make sure the knowledge we're sharing is of a suitable quality, relevant, applicable, up to date, if the time expended creating that knowledge is going to pay off. The process we use for managing knowledge should exist to make sure all of those superlatives I just mentioned remain true. If users are presented with incorrect knowledge, naturally it's going to create issues or compound them and maybe cast doubt on your ability to deliver service. Imagine you go onto any service provider's website and the information they present to you in response to your query is out of date, incorrect, poorly written. They probably won't be able to count on your custom much longer if their incorrect knowledge has wasted your time, inconvenienced you, cost you money. The same applies here. Without getting into the absolute weeds, I think there are 3 really important considerations for your knowledge management process. 1 is make sure all of your knowledge is owned. Somebody or people who maybe begrudgingly is going to take responsibility and action for making sure the knowledge material they own is up to date, quality, relevant. Typically, it's best if these people are within the support teams, the service owners for the services your function provides, rather than some centralised, perceived oracle for all things knowledge. Our change managers are responsible for managing the change process. However, they don't own and craft all the RFCs. This is done by the experts that know and understand those services. Again, the same applies here. Your knowledge manager should be focused on supporting those teams, make knowledge creation and management as simple and as straightforward as possible, providing templates, metrics on what knowledge is being used and what isn't, but not the content itself. Not having knowledge owned means quickly your content is going to become outdated, incomplete, irrelevant. That leads us nicely to the next 2 points, approvals and reviews, the 2 key tasks for our knowledge owners. Let's get the simple one out of the way, review. Make sure every knowledge article has an expiration date and use that date to trigger relevant review activity in your ITSM workflows. A couple of things I normally insist on. Firstly, the expiration date has to be realistic and configured in line with your knowledge management plan or principles. I like to include in those all knowledge will be reviewed at least annually. Therefore, in my ITSM, you can't set the expiration date more than a year in advance. Secondly, on reaching that date, the knowledge article automatically gets depublished, unpublished, whatever the word is, and the owner is asked to review the content via an assigned task before deciding whether to republish or retire the content. That way, it means your knowledge base will remain clean of content that doesn't meet your principles. Finally, approvals. I think there is definitely a place for approvals in your knowledge workflows, but like other processes, where appropriate, where suitable. We don't, or at least shouldn't, apply a sheep dip approach to requests or changes. Instead, we let other factors determine what approval is required or if one's needed at all. Applying a blanket every article has to be approved before it gets published, that approach is overly conservative and will just result in admin for your service owners. For example, if you're publishing release notes to your audience, then I would imagine as part of your change process, you're reviewing the content of those release notes is of sufficient quality, accurate, etc. So then why approve it again when it gets added to your knowledge base? For sure, have approvals, but apply these only where that they provide some level of value and not just to tick some governance box. Right then, hopefully you will find that some decent knowledge, excuse the pun, to get your knowledge practice in better shape. Thank you for stopping by. See you next time at Switch It Off and On Again.